Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. I know some of you are here because you're in CIT, and so you're going to be engaged in a really interesting talk. I know you have your laptops up because you have to take notes. Otherwise, please turn off your phones, everybody. Turn off your phone. So we have very special guests today, and I want to welcome you to the Center for Catholic Studies Lecture and the Human Journey Colloquium. And today we are honored with a really special guest, Cardinal Christophe Pierre, who's the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. That means that he's the representative here in this country to the Pope. And I think more important for us, not more important, but very important for us, he's our friend and our family member, and I'll explain in a minute. Today, Cardinal Pierre will give a Bergoglio lecture, and the Bergoglio lecture speaks to the heart of Sacred Heart University's mission, which is rooted in the Catholic intellectual tradition with a vision for social justice. And these lectures are also bring to us great lecturers, great intellects from the Catholic tradition who will be speaking about the legacy of Pope Francis, our previous Pope, and his work in the world. And so today we bring a most renowned lecturer, Cardinal Pierre. He will speak about this year's Jubilee Year of Hope, which was initiated and exemplified by Pope Francis. He'll talk about the influence of Father Luigi Giussani, who is the founder of Communion and Liberation, and he'll conclude with some early indications of the papacy of our current Pope Leo. So you're in for a very interesting, enlightening, and I think really educational talk. So pay attention. But let me tell you a little bit about Cardinal Pierre, who's a member of the Sacred Heart University family. He has an extraordinary career. He entered the seminary to become a priest in 1963, and he interrupted his studies for 2 years of military service, after which he was ordained a priest in 1970. He obtained his master's degree in theology at the Institut Catholique de Paris, and he later received his doctoral degree in canon law in Rome. He then earned a diplomat from the Holy See School for Diplomacy, the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy in Rome. He has served diplomatic missions in New Zealand, Zimbabwe, Cuba, Brazil, and then he was appointed an apostolic nuncio, and he served with considerable distinction as apostolic nuncio in Haiti, Uganda, Mexico, and now, in the past 10 years, in the United States. He is known for his humility, his simplicity. He's known as a man who goes among the people, and he's always ready to help anyone regardless of their status. He is a deep theological thinker and a man of great wit and humor. And most important, he became a member of the Sacred Heart University family when he was awarded an honorary doctorate here at Sacred Heart in 2017. He has visited our campus 2 or 3 subsequent times, and today we are so honored and grateful to have our friend and our family member return to us. Please join me in welcoming Cardinal Pierre.
Thank you. Greetings. So my subject will be being witness to hope, a kind of reflection about this year of hope. But I would like you to reflect about the transition between one pope to the other. You know, I think it's always interesting. This is the history of the Church. As you know, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, made me a cardinal 2 years ago. Actually, that was yesterday. So I've been a cardinal for 2 years. But I was lucky enough to participate to to the conclave. Yeah. So that was quite a big experience of church, the experience of the Holy Spirit. So a few reflections which you will hear now are the fruit of my experience. I always try to draw from my experience as a priest, as a bishop, and now as a cardinal, as an nuncio representing the Holy Father in 9 places in my life during the last 50 years. But the last one, and not the least, of course, has been the United States. So hope is one of the 3 theological virtues that, along with faith and charity, structure Christian life. I think it's important, you know. We are Christians because we are people of hope, of faith, and of charity. That's what it is, our identity card. Okay? However, it has traditionally been considered the most fragile of the 3. While faith is directed toward the content of the revelation and charity is expressed in concrete dedication to one's neighbor, hope seems to move in ambiguous territory. It refers to what is not yet possessed, to what is yet to come, to a promised but yet to be realized fullness. In a world marked by uncertainties, wars, ecological crises, forced displacement, and profound inequalities, speaking of hope may seem naive or even irresponsible. However, Pope Francis made this virtue one of the keys to its teaching and pastoral style. From his first appearance as Bishop of Rome on March the 13th, 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, you remember him? Displayed a way of being in a world that disarmed many. Simplicity, closeness, humility, and above all, a serene trust in God's action in history. When he asked the people gathered in St. Peter's Square to pray for him before imparting his blessing, many sensed that this pontificate would be marked by something new, by a distinctive seal, not that of power or prestige, but that of service and trust. This trust, which is another word for hope, permeated all his gestures, homilies, and documents. The global context in which Francis exercised his ministry was particularly complex. It was a time that some authors, including the Pope himself, described as a change of era. Remember that word, change of era. Globalization has transformed communication, economics, and politics. Armed conflict have once again taken center stage internationally. Mass migrations question the identity of nations, and environmental degradation endangers our common home. In the midst of this situation, many are tempted by cynicism, indifference. Maybe the big danger today is indifference, or despair. Precisely in this context, the Pope tirelessly repeated that Christians are not prophets of doom, but guardians of a promise. Important word. That promise is Christ himself, who has conquered evil and death. For Francis, speaking of hope does not mean ignoring the gravity of the problems. On the contrary, his direct and often prophetic language forcefully denounced injustice, corruption, violence, and the disregard of the poor. But at the same time, he remained firmly convinced that God is at work. Let us not allow hope be stolen from us, he affirmed in his first apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium. This is the most important document of the Pope, the joy of the gospel, Evangelii Gaudium. This call resonated throughout his teaching. Hope is not a spiritual adornment, but a condition that makes it possible to live, resist, and transform the world. This first point of my reflection will speak of the central theme, Francis's legacy regarding hope. Throughout his pontificate, and especially in the papal bull, you know, a papal bull is an official document, you know, usually written in Latin, so you have to translate it. But you don't usually, here in this university, you don't need to translate Latin, you do all understand it, isn't it? So the papal bull Spes non confundit, Francis offered a profoundly Christological and pastoral vision of this virtue. His proposal is neither evasive nor naive, nor it is a hope reduced to a mere psychological optimism. Rather, it is a virtue born from the experience of the risen Christ, lived in community, and translated into social commitment. Later, we will have a brief conversation with a man who has helped me to understand Pope Francis. I'm referring to Luigi Giussani, the Italian priest who founded the international movement Communion and Liberation. Giussani understood hope as the reasonable certainty that reality is inhabited by meaning. Giussani used to repeat that hope is not waiting for something to magically change, but rather living already now in the certainty that God keeps his promise. This horizon, centered on the encounter with Christ, illuminates and reinforces the way Francis presents hope as a path for the Church and for the world. Finally, we will note some intuition that Pope Leo XIV gave us at the beginning of his pontificate. So the first point, an incarnate hope, the witness of Pope Francis. Discussing Pope Francis's legacy regarding hope cannot be limited to a review of magisterial documents. His teaching on this virtue was found in a particularly eloquent way in his way of living, speaking, and acting. Francis was not merely a theologian or a pastor who exhorted others to hope. He was, above all, a witness. From his first appearance as Pope to his visits to the world peripheries, he demonstrated an incarnated hope, lived authentically, in touch with the world's suffering and deeply rooted in the gospel. One of the most visible elements of Francis' style was his closeness to the people. This was not simply a communicative strategy, but a pastoral choice, born of his Christological vision. Christ became flesh, dwells among us, truly touches our wounds. Therefore, Christian hope cannot be considered an abstract idea, but a generic feeling of optimism. No, a generic feeling of optimism. Hope is called to be translated into concrete gestures of consolation, listening, very important, tenderness, and commitment. When Francis embraced a child with an incurable illness, when he visited a prison, I accompanied him in Mexico, visiting a prison. It was really a fantastic moment. Or knelt before a homeless person, he not only conveyed compassion, his entire life bore witness to a serene certainty that, even in the midst of suffering, God does not abandon us. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this incarnate dimension of hope became even more visible. in the historic prayer of March 27, 2020, in an empty and rainy St. Peter's Square, you may remember that, the Pope spoke words that moved the entire world. He was alone, but the world was there. We, he said, we found ourselves frightened and lost, like the disciples in the boat. We were surprised by an unexpected and raging storm. We realized that we were in the same boat, all fragile and disoriented, but at the same time, important and necessary, all called to row together. At that moment, amid global darkness, Francis offered a prophetic word. Not a magic bullet, but the reminder that Christ is in the boat and that his presence sustains the hope of the world. This hope is not naive. Francis faced reality with an often uncomfortable clarity. He spoke of the Third World War in pieces. You remember that? He denounced the economic system that kills. He firmly condemned clericalism, abuses of power, racism, the exploitation of migrants, and indifference to the poor. But his language did not stop at denunciation. It went further, proposing paths of personal and social transformation. And he did so from a radically Christian conviction. God is at work, even in the hidden folds of history, and his love is stronger than evil. This witness was reflected in his constant calls for the church that goes forth, one that does not withdraw into itself or its certainties, but rather dares to walk alongside the men and women of our time. In this sense, hope also becomes a criterion for pastoral discernment. He said, and this is a sentence I like much, I prefer a church that is bruised, wounded, and soiled from going out into the streets, rather than a church that is sick from being confined. End of quote. That's in Evangelii Gaudium. This pastoral dynamism is permeated by hope. Only those who believe that the world can change, that people can be touched by grace, that good is possible, dare to evangelize with this kind of passion. At the center of this spirituality is the person of Jesus. Francis did not propose ideas or ideologies. He proposed a living relationship with the risen Christ. From this comes hope. In his encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, he insists, I quote, hope is bold. It knows how to look beyond personal comfort, beyond the small securities and compensations that narrow the horizon, and opens itself to great ideals that make life more dignified. Hope, then, is not resignation or evasion, but a courageous decision moved by grace to live differently. Now, the second point. Hope as the core of the Jubilee. On May 9th, 2024, Pope Francis published the papal bull of indiction of the ordinary Jubilee of the year 2025. We are still in this year, Jubilee year, entitled Spes non confundit, hope does not disappoint. This expression, taken from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, encapsulates the spiritual and pastoral guidance that Pope Francis wanted to offer the Church in this particular time. More than a simple introduction to a liturgical event, the papal bull presents itself as a true and Christian manifesto for an era marked by disenchantment, social fragmentation, and the loss of the transcendental horizon. From the very first line of the document, Pope Francis emphasizes the central role of hope as a light that dispels darkness, an indispensable virtue not only for believers but for all humanity. Quotation. Today, more than ever, in a world wounded by wars, polemics, pandemics, economic crisis, and climate change, Christian hope is revealed as a firm anchor, enabling us to resist without surrender and to move forward without giving in to fear or nihilism. Francis articulates his reflection around the conviction that hope is not merely passive waiting, nor a spiritualistic evasion, but dynamic force that transforms concrete life. In this sense, he takes up an idea already present in Evangelii Gaudium, that the evangelizing mission cannot be sustained without the certainty that God is at work today, here, amidst the world's contradiction. This is hope. Hope is what allows Christians, especially Christians in political life, to continue on their journey, even when the visible results seem meager, modest, or uncertain. A notable aspect of the bull is its insistence on the communal nature of hope. It is not a virtue lived in solitude, but a shared experience that finds its fullest expression in ecclesial communion. And he says, Christian hope does not isolate or confine, but unites and sends forth. It is the joy of knowing that we are accompanied by God and by our brothers and sisters on the journey. End of quote. This emphasis on the ecclesial dimension of hope is consistent with the entire teaching of Francis, for whom the Church cannot withdraw into itself or lose its missionary zeal. Hope, as an eschatological force, liberates us from fear and encourages pastoral creativity. Rather than being a refuge for pure souls awaiting the end of time, the Church is presented as a community of witnesses who, animated by hope, become a prophetic sign of reconciliation and peace. The Argentine Pope also linked hope to works of mercy, recalling that there can be no authentic hope without a concrete commitment to the poor, migrants, the sick, prisoners, and all those discarded by contemporary society. In a clearly evangelical vein, Francis emphasized that Christian hope is realized in active love. It is in the face of others, especially those who suffer, that Christian hope is made visible, says the Pope. Compassion is not a soft feeling, but a powerful form of hope. One of the most profound moments of the bull lies in its biblical reading of the history of salvation. From Abraham to contemporary martyrs, Scripture is presented as a pedagogy of hope. God is faithful to its promise. Even when people fall into exile, slavery, or sin, God does not abandon them. He acts, hopes, forgives. Francis invites us to read the Word of God not as a collection of ancient texts, but as a living source of hope for our present. Every page of the sacred scripture contains a seed of hope for those who read it with an open heart, says the Pope. In the context of the Jubilee 2025, this vision takes a special significance. The Jubilee is not just a time of indulgences or ritual celebrations. It is a spiritual opportunity to renew hope in God's action, to heal, and that's very important, heal personal and social wounds. And all of us, we have some. And to restore the broken bonds with how many people we have broken. Pope Francis affirmed that Jubilee hope is a hope open to the future, not through evasion, but through commitment. Thus, it connects with the Church's prophetic tradition, which is unafraid to proclaim conversion, forgiveness, and reconciliation as path towards a new life. Finally, the bull connects this hope with the figure of Mary, Mother of the Church. In her, who stood steadfast at the side of the cross and believed in the resurrection, the Church recognizes the model of a hope that never fails. The Pope concludes the bull by entrusting the Jubilee journey to the intercession of the Virgin. May she, Star of Hope, accompany all the pilgrims of the Jubilee and teach them to hope against all hope. Now, the third part, a missionary and transformative hope. For Pope Francis, hope is not merely an interior attitude or a private virtue. It is an active force that drives the Church to go beyond herself, to take risks for the good of others. This is very important. And to commit to the transformation of the world. In this sense, Christian hope has an essentially missionary dimension. It is not limited to personal consolation or the expectation of a better future, but becomes the driving force of a dedicated life, of a community that proclaims the gospel with joy and without fear. In Evangelii Gaudium, we can see the insistence that the proclamation of the gospel is intimately linked to the experience of hope. It's not about proposing a more or less correct ethical system, no, but about sharing the good news. God has burst into history. His love saves, and salvation is an invitation to all. You remember when he said, todos, todos, todos. Nobody is excluded. In the words of Francis, the joy of the gospel fills the hearts and lives of those who encounter Jesus. With Jesus Christ, joy is always born and reborn. That was the beginning of Evangelii Gaudium. This joy, a sign of Christian hope, becomes missionary energy. Only those who hope experience God's faithfulness in their own flesh and can thus speak with conviction to the hearts of others. But this hope is neither static or elusive. In the Church's vision, hope is deeply concerned to reality. It is not a question of waiting for the world to change from the outside, but of committing ourselves from within. For this reason, the Pope have repeatedly affirmed that evangelization and human advancement are not two separate tasks, but dimensions of a single mission. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis writes, hope is bold. It knows how to look beyond personal comfort, beyond the small securities and compensations that narrow the horizon, and opens itself to great ideals that make life more dignified. In this way, hope is not synonymous with resignation or conformism, but with spiritual courage and historical commitment. This dynamism is also reflected in the preferential option for the poor. Hope becomes credible when it touches the wounds of the world. It is not enough to proclaim doctrinal truth with all correctness. We must embody them in actions, structures, and lifestyles that are truly close to the pain of the most vulnerable and the wounded. For this reason, not only Pope Francis or Pope Leo XIV, but many saints have promoted a simpler, poorer church, closer to the people. Pope Francis has helped us there the question of self-referentiality, triumphalism, presumption, because all of these are obstacles to a truly evangelical hope. In this line, the process of reform of the Church in which we find ourselves and which we call by various names such as conversion or synodality, it is not an end in itself, but a means by which the gospel can be announced with greater transparency. In this context, hope is a criterion of authenticity and verification. A community that lives in fear, locked into its traditions, distrustful of the world, does not transmit the joy of the risen Lord. On the other hand, an open community that welcomes, serves, and forgives becomes a prophetic sign of the kingdom that has already begun. We are not talking here about a generic hope, like the one some more or less humanist thinkers are currently promoting. Forgive me for insisting, but what we are talking about is a radical trust that Jesus is alive and present in our personal history and in the greater history of the world. This certainty allows Christians to see possibilities where others see only failure, to open paths where there seems to be no way out, and to sustain the lives of the weakest, even in the midst of adversity. In other words, the Christian is one who never closes the door to hope, because their Lord is the God who breaks in, who never abandons, and who makes all things new. From this perspective, Christian hope is also a form of resistance. In the face of a world that tends towards disenchantment, cynicism, and utilitarian circulation, hope sustains a different perspective, a perspective capable of discovering good amid evil and hoping for fruit even in an arid land, of championing brotherhood amid division. Now, I would like to make a few reflections with the harmony with Father Monsignor Giussani. Maybe you have not heard about this gentleman, but I think if one day you happen to read some of his books, I think we will benefit from it. The harmony with Giussani. Although Pope Francis and Luigi Giussani do not belong to the same generation or immediate context, there is a surprising spiritual harmony between them. Reading Giussani has greatly helped me to view Francis with great peace and disposes me to allow myself to be guided by Leo XIV, universal pastor of the Church today. You know, I think it's important, and you should yourself take the opportunity of your being university students to read and read and read and read and read anything. Do you read, by the way? Do you? No, not so much. I can tell you not enough. You know, what has saved me in my life is that I've read a lot.
We have to give him more assignments.
Huh?
We have to give him more assignments.
More seminar. You know, one day, you know, if you are a bit bored, you know, you invite me, I will tell you how to read. You know, I spent a lot of time myself in the planes, so that's where I read, you know, because when you are in a plane for 3 or 4 hours, you have nothing to do, and don't do like most of the people do, you know. They try to do these games, you know, with cars for 2 hours. Again, take a book and read to try to understand the reality as it is. Okay, Jeroen. So reading Giussani has greatly helped me to view Francis with great peace and disposes me to allow myself to be guided by Leo XIV, universal pastor of the church today. You know, we have had the great opportunity to have, you know, as Pope, huge pastors, shepherds, people who are, you know, can offer us today. So don't expect for this Pope to die in order to discover him. Discover him when he is alive. Read about him, you know there are already plenty of books. So you have good advice, isn't it? Giussani understood hope not as an abstract virtue or a generic attitude of optimism, but as a reasonable certainty that life has meaning, even in the midst of pain, sin, and absurdity. In his book, Can We Live Like This? Good question. Can we live like this? The Italian theologian helps us to understand that hope is not the certainty that, in any circumstance, reality contains the possibility for good, because that hope is the certainty that in any circumstance, reality contains the possibility for good, because Christ is present. There is positivity in reality that we must learn to recognize. That's the beginning of wisdom. This kind of approach, far from being simple spiritual consolation, is an existential provocation. It invites us to look at reality with new eyes, with an openness that does not exclude drama. In the reality, there is always drama. You know? The reality of my personal life, the reality of my family, the reality of my country. Everywhere, you know, you have drama. But don't exclude it. Integrate it. But that passes through it with a radical confidence that our fragile life is sustained by an infinite goodness, by an other who fully sympathizes with the deepest part of our heart. Giussani's pedagogy offers valuable keys to interpreting Francis's pastoral proposal. Both agree on placing experience at the center. It is not about imposing a doctrine from outside, but about accompanying others with friendship, thus helping them recognize the presence already at work in their lives. Hope, from this perspective, is not something that is taught, but something that is contagious, something that is witnessed to through closeness, through patience, through attentiveness to the gaze of my neighbor. This is not theory, but life through life. And we experience it all, you know, through a friendship. The friendship, you know, all of us, we cannot survive without a friendship. The friendship of our family, the friendship of our friends, you know. So, but pay attention to that. In conclusion, a church that waits and walks. Throughout his pontificate, Pope Francis offered the church and the world a consistent, courageous, and profoundly evangelical witness of hope. Pope Leo XIV has taken up the torch from its predecessor and in an even more incisive way, has led us to the heart of the Jubilee of Hope. Of course, you know, we still don't know Pope Leo, so we have to discover him. But, you know, I wish this very brief presentation of mine will alert you, alert you about listening to Pope Leo. Maybe we have not listened enough to Pope Francis. But if you listen to Pope Leo, you will understand Francis. Because, you know, it will be a kind of continuity. And this is what the Church is all about. Our new shepherd teaches us, I quote, Christian hope always drives us to risk more, to think big. I like it, to think big. Do you think big?
Are you afraid to think big?
Not drink, not dream big. Think big. That's the difference. To not be content with the status quo. You know? Sometimes I see people at the age of 15, they look like people of 85. They are always in the status quo situation. It's terrible. Think big, dream, you know, but not just a dream, but dream, of course. So this is not a sentimental or voluntaristic hope, but a hope that springs from the encounter with the living Christ, which transforms our view of reality and inspires us to live boldly and tenderly in the midst of the wounded world. The Church's magisterium has restored a central place for this theological virtue in Christian life, and has intimately linked to mission and mercy. Mission and mercy. Mission and mercy. We don't remain in ourselves. Go. And mercy. Ecclesial reform. Communion among peoples. The entire social doctrine of the Church is linked to hope. Without this virtue, the social doctrine of the Church becomes a drab agenda of values, principles, and lifeless concepts. Obviously, nobody will pay attention to it. I conclude by recalling that just a few weeks ago, Pope Leo XIV meditated on Jesus Christ on the cross. My God, you remember? My God, why have you forsaken me? That's Matthew 27. Recalling this mysterious scene of the Passion, Pope Leo tells us, I quote, we are accustomed to thinking of the cry as something decomposed, to be repressed. The Gospel gives our cry immense value, reminding us that it can be an invocation, a protest, a desire, a surrender. Indeed, it can be the extreme form of prayer. This is the true prayer, by the way. To pray is not just to repeat words. Prayer is to say things you will say only to God and maybe to your friends. Yes, because there is also this in the cry, a hope that does not resign itself. We cry out when we believe that someone can still hear. Nobody listens to me, but you, God, you listen to me. That's it. We cry out of desperation. Not out of desperation, but out of desire. We want something. We aspire to something. Jesus did not cry out against the Father, but toward the Father. Even in silence, he was convinced that the Father was there. And so he showed us that our hope can cry out even when all seems lost. End of quote. Let us ask God for his grace that even in the moment of the cross, we may be aware that another hears us and sustains us. Bearing witness to this is the very essence of Christian leadership. The Christian leader, all of us, all of you, you are being called, that's your vocation, to become Christian leaders. Each one in his own way, but be convinced of that. The Christian leader is not then some sort of, in this world we have a lot of new leaders. How do you call them? Influencer. Wow. Is there some influencer around you? No. Influencer? Some? Oh my God. Influencer. Yeah. You know them, influencer. The Christian leader is not then some sort of super influencer adorned with biblical quotations. There are people, they can quote the Bible like that. And then what? Much less a cult of cultural warrior. The Christian leader is someone who has verified in his own life that Jesus has already conquered sin and death. It is this victory that is shared with us as grace as we approach reconciliation, not polarism. Don't polarize the society. It's already polarized. So we don't need to add polarization to polarization. Work for reconciliation, and which makes it possible to bear witness to the faith in any circumstance. And may the Holy Virgin Mary of Guadalupe, Mother of Hope, I say Guadalupe because, I spent 9 years of my life in Mexico, and I am a devoted, to Our Lady of Guadalupe. The Mother of Hope for us and for our people, educate us on the path that leads to her Son. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your Eminence, thank you for an amazing and inspiring talk. Before we begin the questions, let me just say to you that there will be a small reception upstairs. Just go upstairs to the 3rd floor. On that side of the floor, there'll be some food, and you can meet with Cardinal Pierre and maybe have a little chat with him, ask him some questions. But this was amazing, it was inspiring, and it's much needed. I don't know about the young people in this room, but the statistics tell us that this is the most depressed and anxious generation that we are addressing in our college classrooms. And so an inspiring talk of rock-solid hope is so important. And I want to say one thing. This is a plug for about Giussani. In one of his books, The Religious Sense, he says that it is innate in us to ask these questions: who am I? What is the purpose and meaning of my life? And that is that innate desire to know those questions, the answers to those questions. Is God pulling us towards God? Can anybody tell me some of the questions on the front page of the syllabus of your Human Journey seminars, your CIT seminars? What does it mean to be human? What is the meaning and purpose of my life?
Hold up. I have it here in my CIT. Wait. It is, what does it mean to be human? What is my relationship with God? What does it mean to appreciate the natural world? And what does it mean to form a more just society for the common good? What does it mean to live a life of meaning and purpose?
Okay. So those are some of the questions that Giussani tells us are innate in us. Now, some questions that you have for His Eminence and his talk. Yep.
Thank you, Your Eminence. You were speaking about the importance of encounter and relationship with God, and it seems to me that one thing that unites the past three popes, at least, and one could probably go back much further, is that they all had, or in Leo's case, have a great appreciation for Cardinal Newman and for his thought, which also is centered on an understanding of encounter. And I was wondering if you might speak about the relevance of Cardinal Newman for that.
Well, you heard about Cardinal Newman, no? Maybe not. You don't know much about Newman. You know, that was an English Anglican priest who, spent most of his life looking for, try to give answers to deep questions, and eventually, he was one of those who spent many years, trying to deepen his Anglican faith, and eventually, rediscovered the truth of the Catholic faith and converted from being an Anglican to the Catholic. And I think one of the motive of this conversion was the value of tradition, is that, and I think it's something really important, what we believe, our faith is based on the transmission of a tradition, it comes from Jesus. And Jesus is not anybody. Jesus is a man sent by God, and he was God himself. That's a big mystery at times. But, the beginning was Jesus. And for the last 2,000 years, the faith has been transmitted. But, this transmission is very bumpy sometimes. Why? Because we are human. And each one, at times, we think that the tradition begins with ourselves. And I think there is a breakdown of the transmission. There has been many breakdowns. This is why we are divided, between Christians. And I don't speak about divisions in the world. But so Newman rediscovered that, that was the result of his research, this meditation. Rediscovered that, the faith, the true faith coming from Jesus went through, the history of the Catholic Church. Well, it doesn't mean that we don't respect the others, because, that's part of humanity. And eventually he converted. That was a kind of drama in his own life, because he had to leave his own tradition. He allowed to leave his companions, but eventually he became, and he reflected a lot precisely about, the transmission of the faith over the last few years. Because, our faith is always incarnated in the human reality. That's the beauty of it. This is not something which comes from above. To be a Christian is not just to believe in a funny Jesus or a special Jesus. No, it's, as I said, it's a gift coming from God which transforms our life and gives us hope and faith and charity. And so Newman was that, and then he converted to Catholicism and became a priest, and eventually, the Pope named him a cardinal. Now it's interesting, because the new Pope, in a few weeks, I think, will make him a doctor of the Church. The doctor of the Church are these great saints who have been so inspiring for the Church that they are recognized. They have, especially like the saints, and that's what Newman is all about. But it's a long story.
We got a question back here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Eminence, for this wonderful address, which, if I had to write a CIT reflection paper, I might maybe focus on Claim 1 or Claim 4 for anyone in Professor Perron's class. Just going to throw a freebie there. But what I wanted to ask, if you'd be willing to share, very few people in this room, I think, are aware of how exciting it is to get to be in the room with a cardinal elector. And if you're sitting here saying, what is a cardinal elector? That means there are very few people on planet Earth who get to be in the room to pick the next pope. And so it is not often that you all get to be in the space with someone who got to be in the Sistine Chapel voting in the conclave for the next pope, which is already in and of itself extremely interesting. What is uniquely interesting in our context is that Cardinal Pierre was part of the conclave that elected the first pope from the United States. And this is of interest to us because, in case you are unaware of where we are currently located, allow me to orient you to basic geography. So I'm wondering if you could tell us, Your Eminence, a little bit about what that experience was like and how you might connect that to the experience of hope that I think came for the global church with the election of Pope Francis, which we feel in continuity with Pope Leo.
Quite a question, isn't it? No. I think it's true. You know, I happen to be a cardinal. I don't know why. You know, I was made a cardinal, by the way, 2 years ago, on the 30th of September. So today is the 1st of October, isn't it? So, it was 2 years. So why? Because I was, you know, I've been nuncio for many years, and the Holy Father chose me. I cannot say why, but anyway. So shortly after being made a cardinal, the Pope died. So you know, the work of cardinals is, if we are under 80, because when you are a cardinal and you are above 80, you are not electors anymore. So I am not yet 80. I will be 80 very soon, but so we were 133 cardinals, and our job was to elect a new pope. You know? And I can tell you, it's quite an experience. When you see the importance of what a pope is, have you seen the movie, the Conclave? Yes. Who saw the movie, The Conclave? Not many, no? Some. Anyway, I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it because I prefer the reality to the. But you know, that has been quite an experience, a big responsibility. You know, when you see the importance of who the Pope is the successor of the Apostle Peter, chosen by Jesus to lead the church. You know, and for the last 2,000 years, you know, we have had a succession of Pope without this continuity. You know, and here we were, you know, 130 cardinals from all over the world, with the responsibility to elect among us the one who will become the Pope. So I can tell you, it's like an electoral process. First and foremost, we promised not to reveal the secret, so I will not do that. But the experience is strong. We had the responsibility to do that, so it was quite a job. You know? But also, what I would like to communicate is at some stage, you know, I really experience the presence of the Holy Spirit among us. And this is what is important, you know, because as a churchman, and we are all members of that church, you know, this is not our church. This is our church, but this is a church which is bigger than ourselves and inhabited by the Holy Spirit. How does it work? Well, we feel it, we experience it, and at times we don't always understand. But I think it's very important, you know, not to forget about that, you know, that the church is really the church of God, founded by Jesus, inhabited by the Holy Spirit, with Mary in constant presence as the mother of the church, and ourselves part of this church. And this kind of association of so many people, reality, spiritual reality, it's an experience which I had never had before, you know, the presence of the Holy Spirit while being, you know, having the responsibility to such a task. That's what I can say.
One last question? Yes. Here you go. Oh, my goodness. Here you go.
and down. Sure. So how can Catholic higher education balance its intellectual mission with its spiritual mission for today's students? So either here at Sacred Heart.
Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't pick up it.
How can Catholic higher education balance its intellectual mission with its spiritual mission for today's students? So either for Sacred Heart or just abroad.
Catholic University. So how can the Catholic mission integrate with the spiritual mission,
Well,
right?
you know, it's a very interesting question. You know, why? Because, you know, precisely, the church is a human reality. It's ourselves. We are members of the church. This is why, you know, we need to speak about hope. When we speak about hope, we speak about ourselves. You know, we need to speak about the meaning of our life. You know, when Jesus, my model of the church is Jesus appearing and beginning to choose people. Imagine Jesus arriving among you and said, follow me. You know, ordinary persons. And they follow, men and women. And he was surrounded by this small group of people. And he spent 3 years educating them. And it was quite a job, by the way. You know, the humanity of the disciples of Jesus is fantastic. And it is our humanity. Imagine that Jesus arrives and he decides to call each one of you and to say, follow me. Some will say, no, I'm not. Maybe somebody will say, yes, but why not? Let's try. And then it worked. But it was a bumpy road. And by the way, the church is that. People being called by Jesus. And then, you know, what happens in a human society is precisely what you said. You know? Kind of a hierarchy, differences, characters, sin, treasons, you know, whatever you have in the humanity. And this is a church. But in this church, in spite of that or with that, something happened. You know, like in the conclave I experienced, you know. At the beginning of the votes, I said, oh my God, we will never reach anything. And then the Spirit, what's up? You know, and then we realized that, what we are has a new dimension. And this new dimension is a presence. It's precisely, you know, it's the presence of God in the human reality. This is what we call in the church sacrament. What is a sacrament? Sacrament is, is the alliance of two realities which are totally separated. The human and the spiritual, the human and the divine. And in the sacrament, you have the human and the divine together. And we become the church precisely as the sacrament of God's presence. C'est-à-dire que we, as in our humanity, so crazy at times, but so beautiful. Because in humanity there are crazy things, but also beautiful things. And that's what happened. And this humanity has become inhabited by the presence of God himself in Jesus. Because Jesus was both man and God. Jesus became, you know, the alliance of these two realities. And he wanted to offer to the humanity what he was. And eventually, we as the church becomes this sacrament. We become the sacrament of God's presence. You know, the first sacrament is the church itself. And this is the reason why the church offers to us the sacraments, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, etc., 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 until from the beginning to the end of the world, in order to enter into the church, which is the sacrament of God's presence. That's our theology. The theology of the church is only that. But this is what gives to our life a meaning. Because at the end of the process, we don't lose our humanity. On the contrary, our humanity becomes more human because than it was before. Because at times, you know, and you see that in our world, at times, you know, people are better in dehumanizing than humanizing. If you go to a prison, if you go to a hospital, if you go sometime anywhere, you see the lack of humanity. Even in the politics at times, I don't say that. But precisely this humanity, with the presence of Jesus, the perfect man, because he is also God, is being transformed. And this is our vocation and our mission.
So on that note of thinking about and being mindful of our sacred humanity, thank you for an amazing... If any of you would like to join us upstairs, just go upstairs to the 3rd floor, down the end of the hall. There's some snacks there. That was amazing. That was amazing, amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I gotta bring them upstairs.
I kind of texted Kim in the middle of it. I took a lot too, just like this puppy.
Hi, Dawn. How are you? I saw you.
I asked him.
It's good. Thank you so much. Feel